Infamous testing of the button. Okay. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my story. And when I started thinking about what I wanted to share with you, I thought, well, what was my first experience officially with Jefferson? So in 1998, I came for a day full of interviews, a very extremely long day of interviews. And when I got to what was probably the 8th interview, the gentleman said to me, so what makes you think you can do it? What makes you think you can last? What makes you think you can be a graduate student here? And to my own surprise, I said, well, I've come too far to doubt myself now. And the reason why that statement sticked with me is because it was so unlike me, I think, at that time. And so I can't tell you the full day of folks I even interviewed with, but I remember that statement. And so I want to tell you a little bit about how I got to that day, but also what has happened since that day. So of course, let me start with the beginning. I'm originally from New York and born in Brooklyn, but really raised in upstate New York, where my mother and father raised me along with my sister. But early on, they were divorced. And so one of the kind of key critical moments in my own development was visiting my father, who had been relocated to Florida. And I remember that he had gotten this kit from NASA, and you could like invent this thing. And I can't even remember what that thing was, but we had this opportunity to be inventive and creative. And so we came up with this idea and we mailed it away. And I can't even tell you whatever happened to that package. But at that point, I remember thinking, well, I'm either going to be a doctor or a scientist or an inventor. And that was a very critical key moment for me because I remembered how exactly I wanted to see my future moving forward. I also had another moment for me when I was in back home in New York, where I opened the mail and saw a pamphlet from the March of Dimes. And at that time, I think the graphics that they included in their brochures were a bit more emotional. And so it really spoke to me, the images that I saw, because I couldn't understand, being the young person that I was at the time, why babies were born with the problems that they were having. And it stuck with me. And I, at that point, said, well, whatever I do next, I want to make sure it is to the benefit of babies, the benefit of children, the benefit of people who are not always in a position to help themselves. But I have to tell you, public schooling was a mixed bag for me. So sometimes they were good and sometimes they were bad. When I was about the same age as my children right now, I had a teacher who, kept me on at the end of school and the class and had said to me, I don't think you got this grade. I think you've cheated. I don't think you're this smart. And stunned as a child, that moment stuck with me because I somewhat questioned whether that person was right. Fast forward a few years later, when I was taking a class with another teacher and I had a test coming up, we had an opportunity to take our state final. And this particular person had said, well, I will give you guys a bonus if you can tell me what you think you'll get on this test. And so she said to me, Nafeesa, what do you think you're going to get? And I said, well, okay, I think I'll get like a 70 something. And she's like, no, I expect more. 80 something. Keep going. 90 something. Okay, make it happen. And I got that and above. In math, very similar mixed bag, where I had first class of the day. This is about my junior year, and mornings were not always the best time for me, where I had an opportunity to excel, but I didn't quite. And so I ended up doing not so well in that class. And I think not only did I not expect more, but my teacher didn't quite expect, more from me in that particular occasion. But I had decided, I know I'm better at math than I think I'm letting myself to believe right now. And so I went on college campus, took that same class, and got an A. Language arts, another situation of mixed bag experiences. Sometimes things went good, and sometimes things didn't quite go as well. And so I left high school about a B average student, although I had a number of college credits that I'd gotten at the community college and higher education level, and wanted to think about, well, what was next for me? Which then leads me to this fork in the road. I could stay local and go to Syracuse University, which my mom was fully advocating for, or I could go far away, across the country, someplace warm in the wintertime. And I thought, well, what do I want to do, right? So even though Syracuse University at the time was offering an opportunity where, based off of the various programs that you had gone through, you had an opportunity to only then cover what you could afford with financial aid. I had said, well, even with that financial aid, I'm not still quite sure I could afford it. And I really wanted to go to Xavier. I spent a lot of time figuring it out. And so I accepted my offer from Xavier. I went down to New Orleans with the waitressing tips that I had to pay for my first semester of college. And I said, well, when I got down there, I figure out the rest, but this was the place for me. I waitressed in the evening while I went to school. I lived off campus because at the time at Xavier, you were required to stay on campus, or if you did stay on campus, you had a curfew, and a curfew wasn't going to work because I had to work. And so my mom helped me out with paying for my rent when I had my apartment. So at Xavier, my first year, I did very well academically and was able to secure a fellowship that was funded by the National Science Foundation and by NASA. And that fellowship was everything to me. Not only did it give me an opportunity to do research, which I fully appreciated, but also it provided on campus a computer lab. I had an opportunity to work at the computer lab, which gave me enough money to then pay for my rent, which was another reason why it was so phenomenal, because that very year, my mother lost her job. And if it had not been for that fellowship and not been those opportunities, I would have had to have canceled college. And if anything, that opportunity gave me a chance to help my mom out during that time. While I was at Xavier, I also did research at a number of institutions across the country, had a chance to volunteer at hospitals and kind of kept my connection to the March of Dimes. And then as I was nearing the end of my experience then, I met this very petite woman named Jessie Perval. And she knows this story well, and I'm going to share this story with you. So I went to a grad fair, and I walked to every single table. And I said, do you have a program with teratology? Do you have folks who are doing birth defects research? I went to every single table, and I got to the table of Jefferson, and I got to the table with Miss Perval. And she was like, oh, we do. And I was like, hold up. Teratology, birth defects. She's like, and that began our love affair, right? That began a decades-long relationship with this woman, because she brought me to Jefferson. She inspired me, she motivated me, and she has been doing it ever since. So Jefferson became very, very close to my heart at that point. And I decided, well, I'm going to come to Jefferson. But at the time, I wasn't quite sure what that would look like, whether that was going to be through the medical school or through the graduate school. And so we had a couple of forks in the road. And then I apologize for anyone who is looking at this screen, because maybe they will miss me. But so I had Jefferson on my mind, and two situations were occurring. One, I had applied to the medical school and I had applied to the graduate school. And the case was that I actually could not apply to both of them and be considered for both at the same time. And so I was waitlisted at the medical school, but I had to decide if I wanted to continue with my path on the medical side or the graduate. And I decided to withdraw my application from the medical and proceed with my consideration for the graduate school. And then once I had been accepted to the graduate school, an opportunity came to me from University of Rochester, and I declined that. 2 reasons. One, because I had decided on Jefferson. That's where I was going. But not only that, I had decided on this path with this man here, my fiance at the time, and we had set the path for Philadelphia. And so without hesitation, I said no to the offer and began my journey to Jefferson many, many years ago. So while at Jefferson, and I have to say there's a little bit of some formatting going on here with the slides, but I came to Jefferson and was funded by an NIH predoctoral fellowship, again, critically important because of the financial hardships that I was coming into the situation with. And I also then joined the lab of Dr. Kirk McHugh. Was with him for a couple of years before he needed to leave the university for the pursuit of opportunities in another state. And at that point, I had again to decide whether I was going to stay at Jefferson or move to another university and another state. And at that point for me, I had decided still, Jefferson was going to be my home. So I moved to Dr. Tom Knudsen's lab, where I was welcomed with open arms and had an opportunity to continue to pursue this area of research that I was pursuing around mitochondrial metabolism at that time. Was fairly successful in the work that I was doing, travel awards, presentation awards, and finished my doctorate, as mentioned earlier, with a PhD in developmental biology, teratology. But I have to say, there was so much of what I did while I was at Jefferson that was not just located in the lab. And so I was highly involved in Jefferson's Graduate Student Association, its African American Student Association, Commons Board, the list goes on, and also still very committed to community service. And so still doing work with the March of Dimes, still involved with a lot of other organizations, efforts, and was recognized with the Frederick Readers Award a couple of times, and then also near the end of my stay as a graduate student, recognized as a graduate student of the year. And so, my time at Jefferson, I have lots of rich memories because of the belonging and the welcome and the embrace that I received during my time. But want to share a little bit too about, what came after Jefferson. So again, formatting is a little off on this slide, but after I finished my time at Jefferson, I continued with Dr. Knudsen, who at that point had left the university to pursue an opportunity at the University of Louisville. And so I continued with him as a postdoc. At that time, my husband was out of the country. And so, we knew we'd get back together at some point, but I went on to pursue this opportunity in Louisville at the university's Birth Defect Center, and had a great opportunity there until then. When my husband returned to the United States, I joined him in California, and I wanted to move on to pursue the next steps, but ran into a bump in the road when the opportunity that I was planning, the certification kind of changed. They were no longer allowing PhDs to pursue this kind of certification that I was looking to do, because I was looking to move into a molecular diagnostic clinical lab. And the interest that I had was because there were all these samples that had come into the research lab. And so I was at a clinical lab, and I was looking to do that work, but then also have an opportunity to do the research on the side. And so I've kind of figured out this pathway for me but then the certifications changed. I also then looked into a different way to go about the certification with a different route. But in that case, it limited you to only receiving it within the state of California. And I knew that I was not planning to stay long-term in California. And so I really had this kind of conundrum of what is going to be next for me. And I remembered how much time I spent while at Jefferson pursuing some of the things that I was doing outside of the lab. And I felt really comfortable leaving the lab at that point to decide I wanted to support STEM education and other students in the pursuit of their STEM career. So moving on, I then went to Thomas Jefferson. That's not supposed to be there, but so I went on to UC Santa Cruz and joined their program, the California State Summer School for Mathematics and Science. And I have to tell you, because I had come across this opportunity, I was really excited and applied for a position that I was probably a little bit more qualified for. And so when the person contacted me about this position that I had applied for, I had said, I apologize, but I've come to realize there's another position that you have, and that's the position that I want. So I really appreciate you interviewing me for this one, but I would like you to make sure to interview me for the other one. And I had said, she was like, but you're not as qualified as you might need to be for the other one. And I said, well, I have not put all my academic credentials, all of my accolades in this resume. You will see that in the next resume. And so they contacted me about the other position. I interviewed for that position, and I then became the director of this program at UC Santa Cruz. I then, when I was there, started an internship program at Cisco Systems for students. I started a middle school girls in engineering program. I had a lot of great experiences while I was there. But at this point, 2007, 2008, I kind of needed to return to the East Coast. And so taking all of that I had as far as experiences while at UC Santa Cruz, took that next step. But I do have to say, I had to take a pause because when I was at UC Santa Cruz, I took a moment to realize things weren't quite what I needed them to be. And while I was at UC Santa Cruz, before I went on to the East Coast, I did some testing. I did some testing that was available on campus and came to realize this diagnosis that I had dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD. And that put a lot of things in perspective for me. Why some of the things that I was having trouble with, and I couldn't quite understand why I was having difficulties with certain things. And if for those who aren't familiar with these conditions, it can affect your focus and concentration. It can impact your memory. It can impact organization, time, which is kind of why I have two watches, if anyone noticed. But it can also impact the information that you hear and what you do afterwards. Reading, writing, spelling. These are some of these difficulties. And I remembered my time while I was at Jefferson. And I remember Dr. Grunwald coming to talk to me sometime after a presentation, and we had a conversation about some of the ways I was saying some of the words. I remember some of my conversations with Dr. Knudsen and trying to figure out how this man could remember all the stuff that he could. I started to put these pieces together. And I think one of the things that was so important at that time was knowing. Because once I knew what was going on, then I could identify the strategies that I needed to do, the things that I needed to do to make things better and to make things different. So I then had, again, this opportunity to go to the East Coast, where I had an opportunity to work either at the EPA or at NSF. And I have to tell you this quick story. I'm trying to be mindful of time, but I applied to both NSF and EPA. And I went to my interview at the National Science Foundation, and I thought I had bombed it, completely bombed it. So I walk out of the building and I accept the offer from EPA. Okay. So I then began my time at EPA, and NSF came to me with a second interview, and then a third interview. And at some point, I left the EPA to go to Jefferson. Now, we can have another conversation if you'd like about the timing of government hiring, but I decided that NSF was for me. And the funny thing is, a lot of people are saying, why are you leaving EPA? Because it was a permanent position. I left the EPA to go to NSF on a temporary appointment. And so I had a couple of people that kind of questioned, like, how does that quite make sense? But I was passionate about the work that I was going to leave EPA for at the National Science Foundation. And that program that I left for was to become an associate program director, particularly being involved with teacher preparation, teacher education, teacher leadership and recognition. And I took that position and did that position for a couple of years. During that time, not just working with that particular program, but most of my time working with that program. And this is that program in particular, the Presidential Awards for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. Had a wonderful opportunity to get to know thousands actually of teachers across the country being recognized by the president, all math and science teachers, some computer science and such. And I did that again for a couple of years until one day, my boss, who was actually the lead for the program, came in and said, Nafeesa, I want you to lead this program now. You've been doing this work, you've been helping me out. And I said, well, I would love to, but can it wait until I return from delivering 2 baby dragons? So I had my 2 twin boys. I returned to the National Science Foundation and then led that program for the next couple of years. In 2011, I have to say I had another big surprise. One was the opportunity to meet the President of the United States through the work that I was doing with the Presidential Awards program, but also had an opportunity to then, as Dr. Brunwald mentioned earlier, to go on and work at the White House. So here up top, you see the White House and the building to the left there, and that's the West Wing on the left-hand side, and the building across the street, that's the Eisenhower Executive Office building. And my office at that time was kind of somewhere in that center ring. And so there I worked not just with the Presidential Awards for teaching, but for mentoring and for early career scientists and for more established researchers, and did that work along with supporting a lot of the other efforts that the White House was supporting for education at the time, not just working for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, but connecting with other offices like the Domestic Policy Council. And again, really just at the time of a lifetime. But that position ended in 2012, in part because, again, it was connected to my temporary appointment at the National Science Foundation. And when that appointment ended, my time needed to end at the White House as well. So I then went to work at the Quality Education for Minorities Network. And there I had a great opportunity to work with faculty members who were at minority serving institutions, whether they were from HBCUs or Hispanically serving institutions, but working with them to help them secure funding at federal agencies. And so again, kind of if some of the graphics were working, you would see a lot of circles, and those circles just reflect how full circle so many of the things that I have done connect. And so I worked at QEM, at this nonprofit in DC, for a couple of years. But then I had some colleagues at the National Science Foundation say, Nafeesa, there's this position that has come up. We really would think you might want to come back. Can we tempt you? And so at that point, I said, let me give this another shot. Let me consider this for a next step, even though it was, again, a temporary position. But I put my cards in and returned in 2014 as a program director at this point, not just supporting the Presidential Awards for teaching at this point, but also supporting the mentoring and again, supporting a number of other programs that the National Science Foundation had in relation to its STEM education portfolio. The other thing that happened in 2015, I'll say, is I had a employer, a supervisor, a mentor reach out to me and say, Nafeesa, there's something that I'd be interested in you doing. It should only take about an hour or two of your time a week. Would you please consider it? I would love to have you as part of this team. And so that's really when a lot of the time that I spent for programming started moving to policy. A lot of interagency work, coordination, developing partnerships. This is kind of this transition. And so if I could kind of show you this, this time schematic, you would see this steady increase to the point where I was spending so much time working on the policy and less of the programming that my assistant director for education in the agency had asked me to come on a special assignment to then really focus on this work. And so for the next couple of years, that was the majority of my responsibility, building a partnership, internal and external, to the agency. And then in 2020 became a senior advisor within the agency, particularly supporting this partnerships and policy work. That was at this time, I will say, when an opportunity came knocking, not too far after I had become a senior advisor, and that was to become an assistant director for STEM education at the White House. So I still am at the National Science Foundation, but again, to Dr. Grunwald's point, had this opportunity to become also an assistant director for STEM education, where I spend the majority of my time. Again, supporting a lot of this through interagency work, K-12, but also to workforce development, workforce workspace, doing this a lot through committee work, but also beyond. Much of what I do supports our efforts and the President's priorities around equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And a lot of what I do in particularly helps support transparency and accountability of our work. Through this committee, we've recently put out work around the best practices that have been found in research to support equity, diversity, inclusion, particularly within the federal STEM workforce. We're also part of a group to put out a strategic plan for military and for veterans and military spouses to support their representation and STEM careers and fields. Just also really put out just a couple of months ago about the work that this particular committee had been doing in all of its work, whether it be in the representation of transdisciplinary learning or through its work to support computational literacy, and or trying to think some of the things that we also put out in this report, particularly, so folks can understand where $4 billion of federal funding goes. So this is the work, again, that I've been doing for the past year during this pandemic, and also kind of been busy working on a master's in leadership and policy strategy at WashU, which I will walk the stage in a couple of weeks to receive that degree. And as I've been reflecting and again had this honor to share where my life experience has been, I wanted to think about and share my own kind of reflection and where I have been, while everyone cannot see, although sometimes you may hear it, but you may not always know about someone's difficulties when they are a neurodiverse individual. And so oftentimes there are these own personal struggles that I have. Why am I here? Have I earned where I am? Am I enough? Am I going to represent my organization, this university? Am I going to be enough to represent all the things that I want to represent? And what if I fail? Who am I disappointing? Particularly sometimes those who have entrusted and provided their confidence in me to do the work. But I think what's really important too is that all of my experiences across the country, the things that I have done, whether it be in government or in academia or working with nonprofits, is, I always do and aim to remember that my self-worth is not a reflection of a report that I put out. And that I do add value, because not everyone in the room can speak to the perspective that I can, as someone who's neurodiverse, as someone who's an African-American, as someone who is a female. I bring value, not just in that alone, but with the experiences that I have had when working in a federal environment, at a nonprofit. These experiences can bring voice to others. And I think that's what's really important, some of the clarity that I have seen. Regardless of the isms that as a society we have and are still working through, and all the systems that are not quite supportive of all the folks who need to be a part of our ecosystem when it comes to STEM. There are those things that I have decided I need to do and move forward. So even though there's definitely some fear and being transparent at times, there is power in that too. So, Dr. Grunwald did not know that I have ADHD or dyslexia. Dr. Rosenfeld doesn't either. This is something new that I'm sharing with not just these two people who have been instrumental in my life, but I'm sharing this with all of you as well. And the reason why is because I know there are other people who have the challenges that I do. And if I can't convey to them that they can be in this step, they can be in this place, and they can take on these challenges and do the same things, if not better, and if not more, I'm not taking full advantage of the opportunity that I have been given. So I get past that fear, and not only do I choose to step out of a kind of a safe place, but I'm making it safer for others, and I'm giving them the support that they need so that they can be here later. Whether it's children or students, it's important that they understand that they have the opportunity to move forward in whatever they pursue. So, I was fortunate, extremely fortunate, that Jefferson was a place where they cared to ask, they cared to look beyond the pipette, they cared to look at the people. And again, truly grateful for the opportunities I have been given. For any student who may be watching this now, or particularly, the video, it's important to find that right path. And I think, there will be always someone who will tell you that you can't. And I've had those people, but I've always chosen to not listen. I may have, paid attention for a little bit, but at some point I had to decide what was best for me. I had to listen to myself. And again, don't let you tell you otherwise. Don't let your doubts and your fears prevent you from taking those next steps forward. Surround yourself by those people who support you. And really, the times when I've been the toughest at myself, I've really had to count on those who've been supportive of me, to which I am forever grateful. And I want to say too that, STEM is for everyone, no PhD required. I think sometimes, we think that we need to support those to become the best and the brightest, and absolutely, but everyone is the best and the brightest, even if you can't always see it at the time. And I think that's what's really important, to nurture our gifts and our talents at all points. We lose so many people through this pipeline because they are not treasured for what they can bring, for the potential that they have. And I think that's one of the things that we can all do a better job at, continuing to nurture those sparks that people have inside of them. So, 2019, no, I had tons of doubts, okay? I had tons of doubts, and I have tons of doubts now, but that's not gonna stop me. I have gone far. I know I have the strength to keep going, and I'll just make the best choices, not for just for myself, but for my family and my kids, and that one who looks just like me. And the point is, no matter what, I will continue to serve those who count on me, and those who I want to make sure that this STEM ecosystem, this community, this world is what it could be and should be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nafeesa. Congratulations again. We certainly have some time for questions. We'll have time for informal discussion, but if anybody had a question for Dr. Owens about her presentation, we can take questions now.
What prompted you to fly all over the country? And did you just seek out the best programs, or did you work to?
I think, to the point, yes. I mean, I sought what I believed would work for me, right? So I pursued what I was passionate about. And so, Xavier University was where I thought I would find a home, and I did. And when I came to Jefferson, same thing. I had the feeling that this was going to be the place where I was going to succeed. So I didn't look at particularly all the rankings. I looked at who was doing the kind of things that I wanted to be passionate about, and also who was there to support me, and who would be my network. And so that's what brought me to Jefferson. When it came to University of Louisville, definitely pursued that because of the support system that I had there. That woman over there knows that so well. And then also, I went to California. My husband at the time, again, was pursuing graduate school. And so, wanting to, always thinking about the balance and the passion of the work. So keeping family centered to the work has also been part of what I've tried to consider. But following my heart, whether my career or family, has definitely led me to many of the places that I've gone.
Would you comment? We've had some discussion ourselves, and of course, we want our students, our postdocs, our faculty, our staff to really be broad and open-minded about career opportunities. And so I actually have a question about your path, and it's about government service, because it's often not the first thing that our students may be thinking of. So I wonder if you could just reflect for a minute on and encourage people to consider a career in government service.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, and one of the things that I try to highlight in the presentation is when government has been particularly supportive to me. So the fact that I received an NSF, NASA fellowship, the fact that I received an NIH predoctoral fellowship, it was not lost on me the impact of those fellowships on my success, which is why when I relocated to the DC area, that's particularly why I pursued federal service, because I felt like it had given so much to me and I wanted to return it. And also I felt like being at a federal agency, I could be a part of making sure those opportunities were available for others. And so that is part of why I went into federal service, and what I have found so fulfilling. Being able to work in federal service has given me some of the flexibility to do some of the things that I've been looking to do. Not everyone provides, not everyone at the National Science Foundation, many of the people who work there are involved in reviewing grant proposals and providing those grant fundings out. And that was some of the work that I've done. But also part of that was working with teachers and having the events and the recognition that we were working and to give them. I've had a lot of opportunities to do, again, work around policy or policy implementation. So one of the, again, the Committee on STEM Education, it has an advisory panel. And during the time that I was in government, this congressional act was passed, and a lot of it was, as government, how are we going to implement this work? And so took, that law and made it into fruition, developing the policy work, the policy that needed to set this panel in motion, developing kind of how this panel would work. We had over 500 people apply to serve on this panel, working to identify the 18 individuals who would serve, and then managing that panel for the last couple of years before, again, I then left the National Science Foundation to work at the White House. So again, there's been flexibility in working in government, and that's one of the things that I've liked. It's been very active, very engaging, and I've really liked the opportunity to do different things even within the same agency. And likewise, being able to connect with other agencies towards this overall mission and work that we have towards supporting STEM careers and STEM pathways.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Marcella.
As a science mom myself and also a recipient of NFS funding, how is the White House contributing to the K-12 STEM education? Like what specific details?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, so through this committee, we are responsible for developing every 5 years a STEM education strategic plan. And so I was somewhat involved in the first one that was developed in 2013. And what this plan does is it kind of gives some guidelines or coordination to the work of the federal agencies, particularly as it helps to focus in on areas that need attention. That was part of the case in 2013 with the first plan, with the second plan, the same being, wanting to focus in on transdisciplinary learning in schools so that we're not providing education in silos, not just providing science or math, but how are these connecting, not just to each other, but how does this connect to real world? But then there's other pieces of the strategic plan that not just supports the K-12, but the whole continuum of our education system. And right now I'm working on developing our new STEM education strategic plan for this one that will expire for 2013. So 2013 moving on, where our focus will be as a nation and where the agencies will put their collective efforts towards K-12, but also again, towards this full continuum that we have. Because again, we want the students that we have in K-12 to have opportunities, whether they're going to, community college or a four-year university, but then also to help nurture them into these opportunities, whether it be grad school or a career.
Yeah.
I don't want to get heavily into politics, but administrations change, which means policy changes. Can you talk about how you adapt during those times of really significant change and a projection of what that administration is looking for?
Yeah. So I have to say, just, disclaimer, I'm definitely here in my personal capacity, not in my professional. But I will say, I have been in government for some time, and so I have gone through changes of administration. But I do think one of the things that is helpful in working at an agency in particular, where our leadership has stayed fairly consistent, is that we have been able to really stick to that mission of science. Working at the National Science Foundation, the point and the focus has always been about providing federal funds to advance our work in science, whether that is in the research that goes on at the universities, or whether that has been supporting our learning of science in the classroom. And so that has been one of the things that has been consistent by working in an agency where that is a mission and a vision for its work. I will also say that, again, in my current position, the work that I do at the White House, it It of course covers the priorities of the president, but it is absolutely wonderful to be working where I am with the leadership that I have in our country and at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Someone was mentioning earlier about our current head of OSTP, Alondra Nelson, and it's a wonderful place to be, a wonderful place to work right now.
Yes.
I was okay. I was curious, in all industries, we've had to pivot the past couple years of how we do our roles, and I was curious with the pandemic, the types of pivoting you had to do in your role and how that impacted that.
Yeah. So I have to say the work per se has not quite pivoted. In 2020, I want to say, I had actually, when NSF kind of shut down, I had actually just come back from a trip to Brazil. I was part of a delegation that was going, meeting with the ministry down there. And so came back to the United States and was told, you need to go on quarantine. And that quarantine turned out to be like forever, right? So it wasn't just 2 weeks, but by the time it was time for me to come back to the office in 2 weeks, everyone had kind of not been returning and everyone has at that point been working from home. I think one of the great things was that we, at least at that time, NSF was fairly prepared to transition into a remote working environment. And in many ways, some of that remote work has been great for people in my community because so many of NSF's employees, particularly on the science staff, are coming in from all over the country. We have a fairly high number of folks who are working on interagency personnel. So they're essentially on loan from their university. And so, for them, it was great to not have to leave their university or leave their home to be able to still do the work that they had set out to do. And we had found that much of what we do as far as convening experts around grants, that could be done virtually, right? So we did not quite lose too much of a step in being able to carry out our work. I have to say for me, as I've kind of mentioned, one of the things that I had found to help me be successful were developing particular strategies for me to be able to do my work. And some of that definitely kind of went into disarray. You also throw in the fact that you've got two beautiful kids, absolutely, but two kids who were virtually learning at home. And so if you can imagine, 3 people in one room, my kids being an arm length away because needing to help give them some focus to their work while also trying to focus on my own work. That was probably one of the most difficult aspects of continuing to keep the work going during this pandemic. But I would say overall, as an organization, we were still able to carry out the work needed.
First, I'd just like to commend you on your work in diversity and equity. It's a passion you share. And I'm going to put you on the spot here maybe a little bit. I'm the head of the science department at the most diverse high school here in Philadelphia. And I'm just wondering, so how do you think it's going to diversify this STEM team?
I think that in some ways, the work is happening. I think in a lot of ways, minds are being opened and eyes are being opened. But of course, there's still so much work to be done. And I think it's not just individuals who I think have an opportunity to do more. But I also think we as a nation have to look at the systems that are in place that prevent success, and those have to be changed. And not always are people always aware of the systems, the policies that are in place. But sometimes when we look at the data, if we look at data with new eyes, fresh eyes, we can see where we are not fully supporting opportunity for all. I think that's some of the work that I've had the opportunity to do, not just kind of in my own efforts to support equity, but I think some of the things that I've done in a professional, in my professional capacity has been, looking at the data, looking where the gaps are, and looking to see how we take a fresh approach and listen to the voices of people who are seeing things differently. Sometimes, again, we cannot see what isn't right in front of our eyes because of the perspective that we have, and we need to ask other people what is their perspective to be able to see it differently. So I think there's much to be done. I think we've done a lot, but I think there's more that we can do, and there's more people who could benefit from all the opportunities that are not quite equitably distributed right now.
So thank you for the wonderful discussion. Would you please join me once again in congratulating our 2022 Distinguished Alumni Recipient, Dr. Nafeesa Hunt Owens.